Donald Trump has slammed Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron for doing nothing to stop the war in Ukraine. So I'll read that to you one more time. This has just come through to us clearly outside in the newsroom. Donald Trump has slammed Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron for...
Donald Trump just humiliated Starmer and his cronies for their stupid plans in Ukraine.
A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. The US president accused Zelenskyy of refusing to hold elections and claimed that he was, quote, very low in Ukrainian polls.
Labour's sinister agenda has been exposed as Trump lets out the shady things Starmer and Zelenskyy have been up to.
This is an absolutely critical week for Keir Starmer. Probably could define his premiership. Has to go over there, has to appear relevant, has to appear supportive to President Zelenskyy in Ukraine, but not in a way that will annoy and potentially undermine Trump.
Now, Starmer's bending the knee like a desperate and pathetic leader while the entire world laughs at him.
So President Trump has sent lefty liberals into a bit of a tailspin this week after he launched a blistering attack on the Ukrainian leader, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Should we have a little listen, remind ourselves what he said?
President Zelenskyy talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won.
Yeah, and he doubled down, didn't he? He labelled Zelenskyy a dictator in a post on social media.
Donald Trump is shredding the woke agenda, and Starmer's getting desperate as the Ukrainian conflict gets heated.
There could be a bit of a trouble ahead for us in our special relationship with the Prime Minister. He appeared to back Zelenskyy, didn't he? And some breaking news this evening, which I am now finding out for the very first time. So this is always fun, isn't it? Donald Trump has slammed Sir Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron for doing nothing to stop the war in Ukraine.
While Starmer is having a mental breakdown in the corner, Trump isn't holding back, launching scathing attacks left and right.
Well, Trump is brilliant at saying things that really, really inflame the left. A lot of things he says at the time, people say that's utterly ridiculous, he's lying. He said that coronavirus came from China, for example. He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal that was widely decried. And yet he has this habit of being found out to be right in the years ahead.
Zelenskyy and Starmer's European cronies are seething as Trump exposes dark truths about them.
But on the other hand, we have had far too much consensus about what's going on in Ukraine. Europe, America have given Ukraine enough money to stay in the war and stay fighting, but nowhere near enough to win. So I think we are guilty of prolonging it. Now, Trump's rhetoric seems very inflammatory, but his history is that he knows what he's doing when it comes to foreign policy.
JJ, you're of the view that I think
Starmer and the EU idiots are shoveling money into Ukraine, no questions asked, and Trump's calling them out.
Yep, Trump is correct. He's not correct on lots of things, but he's very correct on this. You go to the mayor of Kyiv, Klitschko, the former boxer. He himself was the one who first said that Zelenskyy is no better than Putin. He's basically a dictator. That's what he's saying. And what I find most egregious is the fact that Western media have painted a picture and done perfect PR for Zelenskyy from day one. The guy is the president. Why is he walking around doing TV shows in army fatigues as if he's the army general, as if he's out on the front line? He's not.
Zelenskyy is behaving like a third world dictator, and while stupid Starmer blindly supports him, Trump is demanding accountability.
He's been bad-mouthed constantly, getting right down from Starmer through to David Lammy, through to numerous people. Does everybody forget the fact that without the assistance of America, we're nothing? We have this delusion that Britain is a major power. The only thing that deters Russia from a major attack is the American presence.
Insecure and arrogant Starmer has forgotten how important the US-UK relationship is, and the consequences will be devastating.
You're always talking about doing things, but you never do it except take things away.
Well, you can abuse us all you like, but actually we were saying it before the election, and since the election we've done it.
But because that hasn't happened, that's why we can't win the war in Ukraine. And I think the comparison with the Second World War is wrong. I mean, of course we were wrong to appease, but we weren't actually ready to go to war in 1938.
The British public has had enough of Labour's empty promises and Starmer's incompetence as a furious backlash mounts.
In the German election debates that happened over the last few days, Germans recognised that the whole amount of NATO's military money that we put in amounts to the same as the whole GDP of Russia.
Okay.
So we're already putting more than they actually earn as a nation. Why are we saying we're putting more in it? What are we afraid of?
All right, well, look, guys, I'm going to pause it.
Starmer's being abandoned by his European cronies as even Germany is waking up to reality. However, Keir Starmer and his liberal cronies are too tone-deaf and delusional to listen to common sense as they're continually pushing the war towards ridiculous escalation. At this rate, Britain will be crushed under the weight of Labour's idiotic blunders.
President Trump has branded President Zelenskyy a dictator in a scathing post on his social media platform, Truth Social. This comes after Zelenskyy criticised Trump for recent US-Russia talks that excluded Ukraine. Zelenskyy said to reporters that he would like Trump's team to be more truthful about the war.
Donald Trump just dropped a truth bomb. He called Zelenskyy a dictator for refusing to hold elections. And guess what? He's not wrong. While Ukraine's leader demands endless billions from the US, he conveniently cancels democracy in his own country. But what does Keir Starmer do? He mindlessly follows whatever the EU and Biden tell him, without a single thought about Britain's interests. Starmer and Labour are so desperate to appease Brussels, they'd probably send billions too, no questions asked. Britain deserves a leader who prioritises its own people, not a weak puppet willing to fund unchecked foreign corruption.
Trump's post read, and I quote, "A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast or he is not going to have a country left." The US president accused Zelenskyy of refusing to hold elections and claimed that he was, quote, "very low in Ukrainian polls." Trump also made several other controversial statements. He called Zelenskyy a modestly successful comedian. He accused Zelenskyy of persuading the US to spend $350 billion. And he claimed that Zelenskyy was only good at playing President Biden like a fiddle.
One thing's for sure, Starmer and his cronies love manipulating the public. Ukraine has become a bottomless pit for Western money with zero accountability. Starmer, of course, would throw even more taxpayer cash at Zelenskyy if the EU told him to. The fact that Labour blindly backs this disastrous war with no real strategy proves how unfit they are to lead. Trump is asking the real questions. Where's the money going? Meanwhile, Starmer and his Labour drones refuse to question anything. Britain needs strong leadership, not EU lapdogs.
Modestly successful comedian is how Donald Trump describes him. He says also in terms that Zelenskyy has told him that half the money we've sent him is missing.
That's a huge line.
That's a huge line.
That's huge.
That's $350 billion spent on this war by the US. Half that is missing. According to Donald Trump, refuses to have elections. He's a dictator without elections, Zelenskyy. He better move fast or he won't have a country left as a threat to Zelenskyy. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia. Only Trump can do this. Biden never tried.
Trump exposed the Ukraine money pit, claiming half of the $350 billion America sent has gone missing. That's a staggering sum, yet Biden, the EU, and weaklings like Starmer stay silent. Labour loves virtue signalling about supporting Ukraine, but they'd rather fund a corrupt government than fix Britain's own problems. Meanwhile, Trump is focused on ending the war, negotiating real peace, something Biden and Starmer never even attempted. Labour.
I mean, so far, the kind of claims that President Trump has been making have just not been true. That when he talks about...
How can you say that, Nigel?
Pardon?
How can you say that?
Well, I'll give an example from yesterday, that he said that Zelenskyy's approval rating was 4%. It's not, it's 58%, roughly the same as Trump's is in America.
How do you know that?
Because the surveys that have come out of Ukraine, when they've actually polled Ukrainians, has come out with that figure.
And who put those polls out? Was it the equivalent of the Ukrainian government?
I haven't seen whether it was...
Marking its own homework?
I've not checked whether it's a YouGov or something like that, but those are the Ukrainian polls.
Yeah, but it's a bit like Hamas was claiming all those deaths, and we're relying on a proscribed terrorist organisation to tell us what's going on in Gaza.
The media is scrambling to discredit Trump's claims about Zelenskyy's approval rating and the missing billions. But let's be honest, who actually believes Ukrainian government polls? Starmer and his Labour cronies parrot whatever propaganda the EU feeds them. They never question where the money goes, how much corruption is involved, or whether Britain's interests are even being served. Just like with immigration, crime, and the economy, Starmer refuses to take a stand.
I have to say I have a great deal of sympathy with what Trump has just said. And all of us know, anyone who's got the remotest bit of nous about them, that war zones and the arms trade is a unique and brilliant opportunity for people to make money.
The reality is obvious to anyone paying attention. War is a business and Ukraine is cashing in. Arms dealers, corrupt officials, and Western politicians all have a stake in keeping the money flowing. Trump sees it for what it is, but Starmer, he's too busy worshipping the EU to care. Labour blindly supports this war effort without questioning a single thing. They'd rather virtue signal about Ukraine than fix Britain's crumbling economy, skyrocketing crime, or mass migration crisis. Trump is right to call out the money trail. Britain needs to do the same before Starmer hands over even more taxpayer cash.
Biden putting this massive sum, 350 billion, I think we spent the thick end of 20 billion in this country on it, and no questions asked. And this is the point. We have said what Zelenskyy wishes for Ukraine is what we will back. Not once until Trump was elected has anyone said, actually, we need to look at this through the prism of what is in the interest of the United States of America and what is in the interest of the United
Starmer and Labour have been prioritising Ukraine over Britain every single time. Britain has poured in nearly £20 billion while actively clobbering the British public with taxes and horrible policies. Trump is finally shifting the focus back to America's interests, and Britain needs to do the same. The last thing we need is Starmer turning the UK into another EU puppet state. Starmer's on the path to make a huge mess, and this could either be the final straw in his downfall or a chance for redemption.
Ukraine, where we are, Starmer, the tightrope, as I was saying, he's got to manage all of this. Trump wants 5% GDP spent on defence. There's no way that we will get to that. There is no doubt in my mind we're in a very precarious position. There's actually a very interesting article as well about the Russian Navy trawling the English Channel, trying to rip up cables, electricity cables, data cables, trying to destabilise Europe.
Keir Starmer is walking a dangerous tightrope, and it's clear he isn't up to the challenge. While Trump calls for 5% of GDP on defense and Labour will never commit to that. Meanwhile, the Russian Navy is actively trolling the English Channel, and yet Starmer's Britain remains weak and passive. Labour's strategy? Ignore reality, virtue signal about diplomacy, and let Europe descend into chaos. Under Starmer, the UK is sleepwalking into disaster, while Trump is the only one pushing for real security. Britain needs strength, not Starmer's spineless leadership.
And in terms of that, Starmer's position, as I said, is tricky. How much do you think Trump will listen to what Starmer has to say? Or is Starmer just going there going, oh yes, of course we're going to spend more on defence, and here's a letter from the King?
Well, very much so, yes, because Starmer's talked about being a bridge between America and Europe. Now, I'm not really sure that works, but as I think you very rightly said, this is an absolutely critical week for Keir Starmer. Probably could define his premiership.
Starmer wants to be a bridge between the US and Europe, but he's just another weak globalist trying to push the woke socialist narrative. Trump doesn't need Starmer's empty promises on defense. This trip could define his tenure, and if history tells us anything, Starmer will fumble it. A leader with no real convictions, desperate to stay relevant, it's embarrassing. Britain needs someone who leads, not someone who bends over backwards to push disgusting socialist propaganda.
And also, the note from the King saying, come for a state visit, which is, I believe, the only leader to have been afforded that twice in their premiership. Is that enough to stop tariffs being imposed on the United Kingdom?
Well, I think potentially, we think we might escape tariffs because our trade deficit and imbalance with the US is pretty even, really.
Starmer's desperate plan to fix the relationship with Trump is with royal invitations and fancy dinners, hoping a state visit will buy him favor. Meanwhile, the British public can just hope that Trump would care about meaningless gestures as much as he does about results. He has been betraying the public by trying to undo Brexit, and now wants to pretend he can leverage Britain's independence for US trade benefits? Laughable. The only reason the UK might escape Trump's tariffs is because we left the EU, something Starmer and Labour fought tooth and nail against. Starmer's gotten so shameless that he'll use any tactic possible to regain the trust of the public.
people in Conservative Central Office who've been poking holes in the CVs of Keir Starmer's cabinet. The latest is the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. Before he was an MP in 2010, he kept referring to the fact he was a solicitor. Looks like he was only a trainee solicitor. And this comes hard on the heels of, we've all seen Rachel Reeves' CV issues about how long she was at the Bank of England. And let's not forget Angela Rayner, who claimed that she was a care worker, a home help for many years.
Labour's entire cabinet is built on deception, and the cracks are showing. First, Jonathan Reynolds padded his CV, calling himself a solicitor when he was just a trainee. Then there's Rachel Reeves, fudging her time at the Bank of England. And let's not forget Angela Rayner, whose work history seems to change depending on the audience. This is the Labour Party, full of career politicians who inflate their credentials and deceive the public. If they lie about their own pasts, how can anyone trust them to run the country? Labour isn't just incompetent, it's fundamentally dishonest.
And in terms of this week coming, who should we keep an eye on?
Well, very much Keir Starmer, as you highlighted earlier. This visit on Thursday to the States is massively important. He could potentially come out of it doing very, very well, offering Trump a state visit, sorting smoothing the relations, if you like, with Ukraine and Europe and acting as the bridge he wants to. Or he could be humiliated and Trump could be really mean to him and he could come home with his tail between his legs.
This is Starmer's moment to prove himself, or more likely, to completely humiliate himself. He wants to play global statesman, smoothing relations between the US and Ukraine. But let's be honest, Trump doesn't respect weak leaders. If Starmer plays this wrong, he'll walk away looking like a desperate middleman, pandering to both sides without achieving anything. Britain needs strength and decisiveness, two qualities that Starmer and his cronies simply don't have. He's in over his head and the world can see it.
The optics of this definitely are the head boy going to see the headmaster.
Very much so, very much so. And that's an optic that Keir Starmer will be aware of. So he'll be looking to get on the front foot. And if I had to guess, that would be saying something positive about defence spending, saying something positive about a Trump visit to the UK, and maybe even, because of course the one thing Trump didn't get last time was to make an address in the House of Commons to all the MPs.
Just how pathetic can this government get? We've become a global laughingstock thanks to these delusional lunatics who just got a harsh reality check. Starmer knows it. Trump knows it. Everyone knows it. He'll make a show of talking tough on defense, try to secure a Trump visit to the UK, and maybe even throw in some empty talk about a speech in the House of Commons. But none of that changes the fact that he's a weak leader with no real plan. Trump leads and Starmer is being forced to obey. And that's exactly why this visit will expose him as the lightweight politician he is.
Donald Trump met the Polish president on Saturday, and third line for European leaders, Keir Starmer will be there on Thursday, and look, I mean, the stakes couldn't really be higher for him. This is sort of what we bandy around phrases like make or break meeting, crunch summit, and the like, probably more than their fair share. But you know, this one's serious.
I mean, it is 3 years to the day, isn't it? Today that the Russia invaded Ukraine. There's still an awful lot we don't know about what the negotiation process is at the moment.
The entire European Union is bending its knee after their sinister agenda against Trump failed. Now, Keir Starmer is walking into this Ukraine crisis like a lost puppy. He's the third-rate European leader showing up late to the party, desperate to look important. But let's be real, Labour has no backbone when it comes to foreign policy. It's been 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, and what does Starmer bring to the table? Nothing but useless talk. He'll smile, nod, and try to act like a Churchill, but nobody's fooled. Britain deserves a leader with guts, not some weak, clueless bureaucrat.
So at least Zelenskyy now being spoken to by somebody, you know, he's offered to resign if it means a peace deal can be made. He wants Ukraine to be allowed into NATO. I mean, what line do you think Starmer's going to be going for here?
Well, it's going to be a tightrope for him because obviously, look, we've seen the notoriously thin-skinned president, when he is criticised, sort of hits back. Doubles down and goes even further, as Zelenskyy found out last week.
Ukraine is on the brink, Zelenskyy is scrambling to hold things together, and Starmer is tiptoeing around, scared to reveal his hidden agenda. He wants to play it safe by not upsetting anyone. But here's the problem, Trump doesn't respect weaklings. If Starmer tries to act tough, Trump will humiliate him in seconds. Labour loves to preach, but when it's time for action, they freeze. While real decisions are being made, Starmer will sit there, nodding along, hoping nobody realizes how useless he is.
Free of independence from America and saying that we need to perhaps even replace NATO with a European defence force. I mean, this stuff is pie in the sky, given that NATO has been the bulwark of European defence for 70 years. Trying to create a sort of bureaucratic, mythical EU defence force in a matter of months is just gibberish.
Labour's obsession with the EU is still there, and it's as stupid as ever. Now, Germany wants to ditch NATO and build a European army because apparently 70 years of NATO keeping Europe safe wasn't good enough. And you can bet Starmer, the EU's loyal lapdog, will go along with it. This is beyond idiotic. A bunch of woke lunatics who can't even manage their own borders now think they can run Europe's defence. The tone-deaf Starmer and Labour would rather bow to Brussels than stand with Britain's real allies. This is weak, dangerous, and completely delusional.
There's some suggestion that Starmer, what he ought to do is, if he's going to talk about peacekeeping forces or troops of any kind, they should be talking about UN peacekeeping forces rather than European ones, or certainly not British ones.
Well, the problem is the UN is crippled by the fact that China and Russia have a veto on big issues.
Starmer's big solution to deploy British troops might just cripple Britain. Since we can't rely on the UN, the EU is even worse. These people couldn't agree on a single thing, let alone stop a war. Labour's answer to every problem is always more red tape, more bureaucracy, and more waiting around while things get worse. Britain needs strong leadership, not a puppet waiting for Europe and the UN to tell him what to do. Of course, when Starmer isn't doing that, he's making things even worse by his stupid idea to deploy British troops. Make no mistake, this could escalate things horribly.
And so far, Keir Starmer's come out and, he's whistling in the wind a little, because he said, we'll commit troops, and everyone said, very interesting, thank you very much. And no one else has gone, yeah, no, we will as well. So, the EU, again, it's a little bit like the EU. The UN's, a bureaucratic, slow mess, with the added complication of the very people who are trying to keep the peace against have a seat at the table.
Starmer tried to sound tough by suggesting sending British troops. Guess what happened? Everyone ignored him, even his European cronies. That's how little respect he commands on the world stage. When Trump speaks, the world listens. When Starmer speaks, people yawn. Labour has no real foreign policy, no real influence, and no real plan. It's the same old story. Talk big, do nothing, and then pretend it was all part of the strategy. Britain needs a real leader, and ask yourself, should we be even getting involved in this nonsense? Starmer and his Labour gang are terrified and resorting to desperate measures.
Domestically, it's not a great time for him to be concentrating on international affairs, is it?
Yeah, there's also the other sort of threat of the Trump White House is the potential of tariffs that he's threatened to put on the EU, whether Britain would be exempt for those. So that's obviously the economic side of the talks, as well as the security side coming up. But he's spinning a lot of plates, as we say in the paper tomorrow. Yeah. There's a lot of bear traps for him still at home to walk into. This mythical growth still isn't coming anywhere. He's now got to find defence spending uptick, which he's been sort of dragged reluctantly to concluding alongside Rachel Reeves has to happen sooner rather than later.
At a time when Britain is struggling at home with crime, immigration, and the economy, Starmer is off pandering. Naturally, he's failing at that too. And now, with Trump threatening EU tariffs, Starmer has no idea what to do. Labour already sold Britain out to Europe, and now Starmer will probably grovel to both the EU and the US, achieving nothing in the process. This guy can't even run his own party properly, let alone negotiate on the world stage. Britain needs a leader who fights for the country, not one who bends the knee to everyone and hopes for the best. The Brits are furious and they're demanding change. There's a furious backlash coming for Starmer, and you can join in by liking this video and subscribing to the channel.